Merry Christmas.
The once-in-a-generation winter storm crippling America is now a national emergency, flash freezing on roads and sidewalks, making driving a nightmare and even walking really dangerous. A fall like this could...
Hello there, folks, and welcome to another episode of Crazy Thoughts, the show that I started a year and a half ago, where I divulge thoughts on games that I have played, new and old, with the intention of it being an ongoing series that I would post a video of every 2 months, and has now had 5, well, soon to be 6 episodes. You'll see what that other one is later. And you could consider this a bit of a year-end wrap-up on all the games that I played from 2022 in 2022, but here's the real kicker. I have played a lot of games this year, but none of them have been from 2022. And it sucks because there was a lot of stuff in 2022 that I was really interested in. The new Pokemon game that was released at the very start that people were really into compared to a lot of the other entries in the series. The new Kirby game, the open world Kirby game. You'd also think I'd be playing AI The Somnium Files, Nirvana Initiative, which is the sequel to my favorite game from 2019, but nope. I also got gifted Neon White on Steam, and that looked really interesting from what I heard about it. And there's a lot of other games that I don't even own yet that I would still be very interested in playing at some point. Like the new Sonic game looked pretty cool, and then there's that Scorn game, which reminded me a lot of Agony, and I mostly just want to play it because I hate myself.
Scorn is not a shooter.
But if I learned anything from this year, it's how real life truly can preoccupy your mind in the weirdest of ways. And, well, seeing just all of the unplayed games that I've gotten over the years while I was packing up for the move into my new place of residence, I decided to focus on those exact games and not play any new ones for the foreseeable future. And, well, based on how much content we will have for today's episode, it turned out okay. Did not get through as many games as I had wanted to, but hey, I got through some of them, and that's really all that matters. This is all going to fall apart anyway when Tears of the Kingdom comes out, but for now, let's just talk about all the games that I have played in 2022 to completion. Well, a point of completion, and just see where it takes us. Who knows, some of these crazy thoughts may give way to even more crazy thoughts, and that may actually bring some excitement to the channel. But enough talk, let's start with... Oh. So here's a funny little thing that happened before the whole moving situation. I decided to make a commitment and go through every single Megami Tensei game, because I've been very interested in the franchise for such a long time, and, you know, everyone has all of their own weird starting points, you know, Persona 3, 4, or 5, or Megami Tensei 3, 4, or 5, and I even started with the dancing ones, or even the fighting spin-offs, but I wanted to start from the very, very, very beginning, when it was just a simple NES RPG. And, so far I've only gotten through the one NES RPG, but hey, I can at least talk about it and how bad it is. Relax, I'm just kidding. It's, well, it's a little complicated. I do think the origins of this series is pretty interesting, though, because this first one here is originally based off of a fucking novel and was published by Namco, of all companies, and surprisingly was considered one of the big 3 RPG franchises of the late 80s alongside Dragon Quest and Final Fantasy. So I was interested to see how exactly this one was going to carve out its own niche within the genre, which, I mean, hadn't been very occupied by then, but, I mean, it was starting to, and I think it did it well enough. This is a very interesting specimen. whereas the other two are perhaps the most basic RPGs can get, even though Final Fantasy has its own party system. This one combines the standard RPG elements with a first-person dungeon crawling aspect, where you navigate through these mazes and just have to get to certain points and complete certain objectives, but there's no big fantasy quest or anything. It's just these two high schoolers who get trapped in a computer and just have to find their way out amidst all of these weird enemies, all from mythical beings, and it's very, very interesting to see compared to those other two games with all the fantastical elements in there. And while it is still relatively standard RPG affair, just still going around finding enemies and bosses with your sword and magic, you have your attacks and defense, all these weird stats, you have your shops as well that you get weapons and defense from. There is one unique element that makes it stand apart of those other two franchises, and that is the Demon Fusion. This is a feature that has become standard within the Megami Tensei franchise, but it involves befriending and recruiting enemies and combining their features to make more powerful enemies. And I was thinking if there was something that had inspired this, but turns out it was just the thing that they had created in order to distinguish themselves not just from those two other RPG series, but from Wizardry. Which, looking into it, I'm not even sure why I didn't consider that could be a main inspiration. It's pretty clear. But even then, all these elements combine to make a very, very interesting game. The problem is, it's an SRPG, and it comes with all the bullshit that one would expect an SRPG to have. Now, full disclosure, I did play an emulated version with an English patch as well, because this was only released in Japan. It has never come to America at any point in time. Even the remakes that were on the Super Famicom in the mid-90s, not even once. And I did manage to kind of sort of get my way through the first few areas without having to use a guide. It was a relatively small layout, even though the scenery did get very repetitive. I managed to find my way through and defeat some of the major monsters just through, grinding and such. But afterwards, it just becomes a big old fucking mess. Enemy fights also just got really, really bullshit without, of course, grinding a whole bunch. But even then, there's just some stuff that, God, just why would you put this in, even in the RPG like this during the day? There are spells that lower your level. Not to mention the innumerable traps that take away your health, all the fake treasure chests that you can't tell which are the real ones and which are the fake ones. And there's one segment where you have to match these jewels together in some person's face, and if you get it wrong, it just locks you out, and you have to reload from a save point. And God, I just cannot imagine how people in Japan got through this game back in the day without fucking tearing their hair out. Though with liberal use of save states and cracking open a good old GameFAQs guide, I was able to get through the game and defeat the final boss with all of the items that made it easier to do so. I am glad I did get to experience this, though. It's always interesting to see just how far a series has come and its roots from there. And can't wait to get to the second one in 5 years. I do have it downloaded, and I do have the patch as well. I just not have gotten around to it. But I can definitely say it's been a very interesting start so far in this journey. This very strange journey. That's another one that people like a lot. Okay, this is not quite backlog mode yet, but we are definitely in games that I have never gotten through, that I have been wanting to try to get through for a very long time now, and now I have. In this case, it would be Luigi's Mansion, the GameCube launch title that has become adored by everyone and has had 2 sequels, but to my knowledge, a lot of people still prefer the original. Anyway, you know how it goes. Luigi gets a mansion, Mario gets kidnapped, and now he has to save him with a vacuum, press the egad. And I have had this game for quite a long time. I got it about a year or so after I got my GameCube, and the main reason I wanted to get it was because I originally thought it was called Luigi's Mission. And I was just obsessed with anything that had the word mission or the prospect of going on a mission to fight people and junk, because I was really, really into Naruto in the mid-2000s when it was airing on Toonami, and Code Lyoko also might have had something to do with it because of the CGI battles, but that show was a piece of crap anyway, and I don't want to talk about it. And yes, despite its short length, I have never gotten through Luigi's Mansion a single time. I think the farthest I ever got before now was the Hall of Mirrors, the ghosts that wrap around you and take away your health. I don't know, I just could never wrap my head around defeating those. But now I am a full-grown adult with a mansion of my very own. You can't say that I don't have one, shut up. I managed to get through the game in 1 or 2 sittings, and yeah, it's a lot of fun. It's like a very dumbed-down, simplified approach to the Resident Evil formula. Just going around a mansion with all these locked doors, getting keys to unlock those doors, getting the treasures inside, and fighting the ghosts and sucking them up. The variety of ghosts on display is quite nice. I like how the boos work too. That's never too difficult with them, but God, it always just gives me that weird sick feeling in my stomach when one just gets away, especially when they just have the 1 health left and they don't get sucked in. And God, fucking 20 years later, this still looks like a fantastic game. Just the art style and just the presentation. Yeah, it all works really well. I'm not sure why I haven't gotten through it sooner. I guess complaint-wise, the final boss was kind of a bitch, and the mechanics can feel a little bit clunky, even though, yes, it was a launch GameCube title, but even though there's still a surprising amount of polish to it, so I can't really complain a whole lot. A lot of people do complain about the short length, but just like I say about Portal, it is exactly as long as it needs to be. I'm curious, how much did this game cost upon launch? Okay, $50 at launch. I mean, I don't know, compared to the other prices there, it seemed pretty standard. I feel like there might be a greater conversation that I could certainly look into at controversy, just how shorter games shouldn't really be correlated with their fucking price, so long as the content within that game justifies the price that people are willing to pay for it. But we can talk about that shit later. For now, great game, can't wait to try the other two in 9 to 15 years. And here's another game that I had attempted in my past and had never quite gotten through. Her Story. This here is a... how do you describe it? It's a text-based FMV adventure game where you play the role of someone sitting at a computer that contains a whole bunch of video clips within a police archive, and you're supposed to search through these clips and try to assemble a murder mystery that this woman who's being interviewed has been accused of being the killer. And it's not so much finding out if she had done it, it's more so what the fuck had happened that led to these circumstances. And while this is most certainly up my alley because I love me a good mystery and I love me some novel game mechanics, but there was just something that frustrated me about just searching for terms and just not getting what I wanted. So I just put it down and never picked it back up, and this was at the launch of the game, and now 7 or so years later, I'm just completely zonked out at work because there's jack shit that goes on there, and yeah, you know what, let's just go through this. Let's just see if I can get engaged with this murder mystery, this non-linear murder mystery. And boy and howdy did I ever. I didn't really find anything new to appreciate about the mechanics, but it did give me a very similar experience to, you know, searching through your YouTube analytics to figure out where views for a video came from. Gave me a very similar experience to when I was searching for a bunch of unnecessary information to pad out this 10-page essay that I had to write for fucking English class in college. Gave me a very similar experience for when I was searching for that one person I met at a bar like 5 years ago and killed. Suffice to say, I managed to actually groove with the search mechanics this time, and the story behind it is a lot more expansive and weirder than I thought it was going to be. And it's very interesting just how this story is structured, because there are certain points where information gets revealed upon looking up these clips that you think, oh, this would be the turning point of the story, I know exactly where this is going to be going from here, but then you find out later there's more information, and these take place during different points during these interviews with this one woman who just pulls off a wonderful performance. Can you tell they're just some indie singer-songwriter that they got off of the streets? No, you cannot. They are that good. Naturally, it did get tiring at some points, just trying to look up certain words or information and just not quite getting the tag you wanted to make the clip show up. But by the end, I was very much satisfied with where the story went and my time with her story. The unfortunate thing is there is just absolutely no replay value, and I'm never going to do that again. It did get me very interested in the other games that its lead designer and writer had done since then and in the past, Sam Barlow, because he also did Telling Lies and Immortality from this year that I don't even think a whole lot of people knew about, but I'm more so interested in the stuff that he did when he was working at Climax Studios, because he was the writer for two of the Western Silent Hill games, Shattered Memories and, I believe, Origins. The most interesting element, though, is the first game that he ever did, a very, very simple text adventure game called Isle, where play a man in a shopping area, just in one specific aisle, and make one action, type out one action, and then the story plays out from there. And it's no wonder that those mechanics eventually evolved into her story, not like 16 years later. So yeah, her story, good time. Very interested in checking out his future work within 20 to 60 years. Okay, now before anyone says anything, not that I think anyone was gonna say anything, I got this before the whole Activision Blizzard bullshit came out in 2021. Yep, 6 months before. But anyway, Spyro Reignited Trilogy, the remasters, remakes of the original 3 Spyro games from the PlayStation era, of which I have actually played all of them on an original PlayStation, as a matter of fact, or PS1 if you want to be technical. And I'll give some quick thoughts about those 3 original games. The first one is my favorite. It's the most streamlined of the platforming, gem hunting, collectathon mechanics that the series is best known for. And the other 2 are pretty good, but I think the mini-games that they introduced and the story elements as well just kind of interfere a little bit too much with the whole gem collecting and everything. It's not quite as smooth an experience as one was, and bit of a shame. I think the third one is just a little bit better though, because at least the mini games in there are better. So I was interested to see if the Reignited Trilogy would change my opinion on how I feel about those original titles, and no, not really. I still think the first one is the best out of the 3, and while I am a little bit cooler on the other 2 because, you know, the modernization of its controls and the minigames aren't quite as bullshit, I still don't care for the structure as much as I do with the first one. But it's still a very good time all around. I think it looks great. It sounds pretty good as well, even if it's not quite the original instrumentation. The new performances and the new cutscenes are also pretty nice, but it's definitely a point where you can tell they were just kind of running out of time, running out of resources, mostly with that third game, and I do know there was a bit of an issue with the development for that third one specifically, but yeah, I can't really complain. It was definitely good enough for me to want to get all the achievements for it as well, which I did. It only took me 40 hours. I've spent that time with my family, my wonderful family, but Spyro was just more important. Okay, here's where the backlog thing enters the whole, I got a PS2 this past spring and I want to get as much use out of it as I can mode. Because I got a PS2 this past spring and I want to get as much use out of it as I can. Also because I grew up playing mostly GameCube games, and I wanted to just see what all the hubbub was about with those dang Sony mascots. And Ratchet & Clank seemed like the most appealing one because I know a couple of people who are super into the series, and it's been Sony's most long-running franchise for quite a while now. Like, it's still getting new games too. And it was also the first thing that Insomniac did right after they finished the original Spyro trilogy, so I wanted to see where exactly they were going after they had finished those games, and just see if I could see what everyone else saw in those games, and see why it became such a beloved franchise to this day. And, yeah, I can definitely see why. It's pretty good game. The hybrid of platforming and shooting with all the weapons that they included is a whole lot of fun. I think the banter between Ratchet and Clank, particular characters, is also a whole lot of fun. The game itself looks pretty damn good for something out of 2002. Very expressive, very bombastic in some places, very wry sense of humor. And the soundtrack, it sounds great. I really don't have a whole lot to complain gameplay-wise. I do think some of the mechanics are a little loose, aiming specifically. But it's just structured well. I love how it's paced, and I just thought it was a whole lot of fun. I can't really say that much about the story, though. Now, obviously, it involves how Ratchet and Clank came to be, how Clank is a defective robot who crash-landed on Ratchet's planet, and they both team up in order to save the world from capitalism and the like. But how do I put this? Ratchet's a dick. And you know, he starts off as like a fun little goofball kind of dick, but there comes a point in the story where he gets mad at Clank for something that happened, and God, he's just such an absolute asshole towards him. And it's not like it doesn't make any sense as to why, but it just, I don't understand why they went towards these lengths in order to just antagonize him so much. There comes a point where the excuse of, oh, it's just made for kids, don't worry about it, just kind of falls short. Because you're playing a game that, yeah, of course it was made for kids, but if so many other people in their fucking 20s and 30s are enjoying it to this day, why is it not fair to just criticize how a story is presented or how a story plays out within a game if it is not very good? And I think this story is not very good. I don't think the story completely drags the experience down because the gameplay is just that good to hold it up. And well, I did the challenge mode almost immediately after I completed it, so that certainly says something. I don't do that often. But after I did finish it, I was just hoping that there would be a bit more care put into the plot next time, and the characters specifically. Because, man, this is where we're going to start off with. I can't imagine what else is going to happen. Next up on the backlog is one that's more so just kind of filling in the gaps with a series in general, and that would be Burnout 2, the beloved racing crashing carnage series from Criterion Games. I love it as much as anyone else does, but I have not played that second game yet, and some of the other entries in the series, but it was mostly that second game I wanted to get out of the way. I played the first one on the GameCube, which was okay. I played the third one on the Xbox, which is my favorite arcade racing game of all time, and it's not even close. Sorry, Need for Speed Most Wanted 2005, and other games I'm forgetting at the moment. MotorStorm. I never even played the full game of MotorStorm, but yeah, you're out of the way too. I played Burnout Revenge on the 360, and I thought it was not quite as good as the third one, but still pretty great. And then I played Burnout Paradise on the Switch, the remastered one specifically, and yeah, that one's pretty great too. So yeah, obviously get to the second one next after playing 3 other entries in the series that are obviously way better and more mechanically sound than it. And I'm not even sure why it took me so long to get around to it. It's just, I don't know, after playing 3, it's just kind of hard to go back. But I did, and yep, it's definitely the building block towards 3 that they made after the first game. It has improved mechanics from the first game, racing and such. It also includes the crash mode, a very basic version of the crash mode. where there aren't any explosions, and that's kind of the problem, as you may expect with the way I have gone through the series. It's just missing the flair that the other games have had. For as much fun as it still is, it's just not one I'm thinking about ever replaying again after going through it, which I did, and I did all the crash modes. I almost didn't go through all the races though, because there was one particular race that I just could not do, and then I figured out you have to do the boost mechanic at the very start of the race in order to have a chance at winning it. So probably never again, but it was still a fun time. Great note for Acclaim to go out on. You know, if I were in the UK in 2003 or 4 at the time during this game's release, I probably would have gone 90 miles per hour on the highway to get my speed ticket voided. I would have helped you out, Acclaim. You were just trying to do God's work. No one else understands your perspective, but I do. Ugh. Speaking of sequels, I've got to another one here, Ratchet and Clank Going Commando. And for this one, like I said, I was just kind of looking for some improved gameplay mechanics and a better approach in the story. And So yeah, they did improve the gameplay mechanics quite a bit. I think the shooting is much better, the aiming is much more accurate, and I do think the new mechanics that they added too, the weapon upgrades and health upgrades, work incredibly well. They definitely scratch that itch with trying to just get through as many enemies as possible and just upgrading them per enemy. It's pretty great. The levels are still nice and varied, they still look pretty great. Some of them aren't quite as structurally sound as a lot of the stuff in the first game, but I can't really complain a whole lot in that regard. But man, that story, it's more or less kind of a lateral move in regards to my feelings about it, but still a little bit disappointed. Now, they did improve the character of Ratchet for this one, which I very much appreciate. And Clank is still around too. He's pretty cool. I think the banter between them two is still very funny. The humor in general is still there, which is the highest praise I can give to it, because the rest of the elements for it are a bit of a mess. With, Ratchet being recruited to help a president for this new mega corporation try to save the prototype for their new product, which is a fucking Furby. Is this really the story that they went with? To me, it felt like a very, very padded out fetch quest type story that you would see in some subpar JRPG. And to have it as a main story, it just feels like a very stop and start experience where very, very little progress feels like it's being made at various points during it. And I don't think I'm alone in it either. I mean, you can complain about the new character that they added all you want. I didn't think they were that bad. But, yeah, it just felt very anticlimactic and just very inessential in regards to the scope of the main series. Again, the gameplay is still very much enough to hold the experience up. Once again, I went through the challenge mode almost immediately after beating it, and it was a whole lot of fun now with the whole multiplier that just incentivizes you to defeat enemies and without losing your health. Great job. Just for the next game, tighten up that story, make it a bit more compelling. Okay, bit of a break from the backlog. Let's put a little scenario in your head. What is one to do in post-COVID quarantine when everything is open and you want to work out and you don't think that running around your neighborhood every single day for 15 minutes at a time is getting all that fat out of your system? And yet you still do not want to go to a gym because gyms are smelly and gross. Well, of course, you can just exercise at home, and what better way to do that than with Ring Fit Adventure, a game that exploded with the casual crowd during quarantine for obvious reasons, and I decided to pick up on my end because I'm not going to a gym, man. This is my only option, and yeah, it's pretty decent, pretty sufficient for an exercise program at home. And we'll be demonstrating how post-haste. So the game comes with one of the patented legendary leg straps that you stick one of the Joy-Cons in and then wrap around your leg like so. It slides off very easily and it's a bit of a bitch to work, but hey, it measures the power of your leg, so can't really complain much there. And then you have the ring con that the other Joy-Con goes into. It has its own vibration sensibilities. The name is escaping me what the term is called at the moment, but it's a pretty nifty little device, pretty durable, considering I've done like 18 sessions of these with some pretty rigorous activity, and it's not showing any signs of breaking yet. Pretty neat, pretty nice. It's good to see that they put their resources towards one of these stupid things and not the actual controllers. But anyway, so what Ring Fit Adventure consists of is the titular Ring Fit Adventure, which is a bit of a hybrid between an RPG and a whole shit ton of exercising. And it's a pretty nifty idea. Now, the exercises you'll be experiencing in the Ring Fit Adventure are its own separate mode, as well as the plentiful mini games that come with it. It's essentially a more rigorous iteration of the Wii Fit formula. If the Wii Fit was combined with Miitopia, essentially. So I do have some complaints about the actual Ring Fit Adventure, since this is what it's focusing on and everything. I don't think it quite meshes that well together. Obviously, if you're super into RPGs, this is going to be super basic for you and you're not even going to bother with it. But this is about as good as this kind of hybrid could possibly ever be. So let's go ahead and just kind of get started with these exercises here. We're going to start with one of those leg lifts. Okay. Alright, let's try this now, and I know. This is the way I went out? What a fucking pussy. But it kind of sort of does demonstrate the issue that I have with the game, insofar as the workouts that the game gives you are very, very good for that kind of beginner's angle that it is intending. And they can be very, very hard on people who have not exercised a whole lot, especially as of recent. And I'm just not sure it really mixes well with the story that they're trying to tell. It's a very exercise-themed story with a lot of goofiness to it, but there's a lot of dialogue and some pretty elaborate cutscenes as well, and it just doesn't make any sense to just kind of have that kind of addition to it. Really, what's likely going to happen is you're going to be finished up with a very long exercise and then be greeted with one of those cutscenes, and then, well, this. I mean, I appreciate the attempt, but I just don't think it really works that well. But because the exercises do work well, I'm just gonna keep at it with that and just kind of try to ignore everything else. Maybe one of these days I'll venture out to an LA Fitness and try to stomp on some of those jocks that just want to show off all of their stupid. I just had the sudden thought that I would have to clean this shit up, but nah, I'm a ghost. I can't really do anything. But I did record the rest of this current episode though, so I can at very least show you that posthumously. Oh, okay, well I guess this is happening again. And we're back with the PS2 backlog for the rest of the video. But I like to think this is an interesting one to discuss here, because this is Killzone. This is the Sony-published Guerrilla Games first-person shooter released on the PS2 in 2004. And I did not know a whole lot about this series going into it, especially the first game. It's interesting. Mostly in the fact that this was created to be a supposed Halo killer. Like, it had the multiplayer that, I guess, Halo was so well known for, and the first-person campaign as well. That's all kind of like a sci-fi alien-esque mix, except the alien here is a bit more subdued. It's just about the Hellghast and how they're taking over the world. And there's not a whole lot of difference between humans and Hellghast, except I guess just how they talk. Or maybe this is just another America versus British thing that we're doing for some reason. I have no idea. But you know, a first-person shooter on console, especially during this era, could always lead to some good old janky fun. So, did it turn out great? Did it turn out terrible? Well, for a supposed Halo killer, this definitely doesn't seem to have the capability to do so. Okay, the mechanics, they work perfectly fine. You have a decent amount of weapons. The controls, shooting works okay. It's just like any other first-person shooter. You're bound to have some fun with that if that's your kind of jam. You know, I have not played the original Halo game, but I feel like I would have a lot more fun with that thing than with this one, because outside of those weapons, there's just no variety to this. It is a very dull slog of an experience. Like, the environments are just so brown and sludgy. It's just gross. And the game itself just runs so poorly on the system. You think for an exclusive it would be very well optimized, but I guess just fuck it. So fucking confident this is going to be a Halo killer, why bother fixing anything? Are you guys even British? No, you're not. You're fucking Dutch. Oh, and let's not forget the sound design, which is just, well, let me give you a little taste of it.
Grenade! Fire!
I never want to hear another Hellghast scream for the rest of my goddamn life. You know, I played the console version for the original Far Cry game, Far Cry Predator. That thing runs like absolute shit and is just as much as a slug as this game, and I'd still like it more. Because at least there's some fucking color with it. As far as I know, the series has never really gotten super high acclaim or anything. That's why there's only been 4 of them. But, I mean, I don't really have much high hopes for Killzone 2, whenever the hell I get to that. But, I guess I'm happy I kind of got through that one just to get it out of the way. And, you know, there's going to be another game we're going to talk about in a few minutes that just makes me question how well Sony did adapt to these trends during this era, because not doing so great. Okay, this is PlayStation on PS2, but who gives a shit? Hot Shots Golf 2. This is the sequel to the original Hot Shots Golf game, which was originally made by Camelot, but for this one they switched developers over to Clap Hands. And, there's not really much of a difference between this and the other game, frankly, which is mostly a good thing. The mechanics work pretty well. I think the controls are a little bit more lenient than they were in the first game as well, so I was able to get a lot farther into it too. And just now that it has a more dynamic presentation, it's pretty good stuff. Well, once again, there was another fucking golfer that was just way too difficult for its own good. After 6 bazillion fucking tries of trying to beat Sweet Tooth at his own goddamn game, I just didn't want to deal with that anymore. And yes, Sweet Tooth is in this game, as well as the medieval person, I forget his name. But yeah, they were unlockable characters. So, yep, another bust. Hopefully when I go on to Hot Shots Golf 3, things will have improved and I can kick Ratchet's ass. And now we have the last game of the day. This is 2003, 2002, somewhere between. Release dates are a bit weird. The Getaway. This is published by Sony and developed by Team Soho. This is a bit of a British take on the GTA formula. It takes place in London and is most notable by having been worked on by a lot of the people who would go on to form Team Bondi and make LA Noire, including their writer-director, Brendan McNamara. We have talked about that game and Mr. McNamara quite extensively with the controversy episode covering that game, but we are covering his original one. And, well, let's start this with a little story. This is not my first encounter with The Getaway. I had played it way back in the day on my cousin's PS2. Watching this game that was full of swears and blood and guts and violence and everything as a 7-year-old, well, I actually don't remember a whole lot from it, except that we just could not get past that first level. I also think we broke that PS2 because one of us tripped over the controller wire. But let's move on from that. A couple years later, I met my current best friend. We've been friends for God knows how long, and we were, just talking about the games that we were playing when we were younger, and I had brought up The Getaway, and surprise, surprise, he had played that too, specifically the demo for it, which also just so happened to contain the very first level of that game. And he could never get past that level too, so after all this time, after all the hype that we had built up for the game for ourselves, was it as great as we had envisioned it in our minds? No. You think Killzone was a sterile experience? No. Oh, this game has it beat by 10 kilometers. Use the right terminology. So let's just briefly touch on the story. You play as a former gang member whose wife was just murdered and son just kidnapped by former criminals, boss mob people who want you to do a whole bunch of shit for them in order to get your boy back. And I'm not kidding when I say that's pretty much all you do throughout this dude's story. I mean, there are story elements to these assignments that he's been given, but it all comes with the pretense of him getting his boy back. And that's all he fucking talks about. He wants to get his boy back. He never talks about the shit that he did with these guys in the past that got him in this situation, just that he wants his fucking boy back. And yes, suffice to say, I did get past the original driving section, but that led into a number of very boring shooting sequences, and that's where the pattern begins. You drive around London to a specific spot, you shoot up a bunch of people, and then you drive to another location, shoot up more people, and you drive and shoot and drive and shoot and drive and But, like I said with the Ratchet & Clank games, the story doesn't have to be super amazing or anything like that in these kinds of games, so long as the gameplay holds it up. And this cannot. This is all compounded with one of the most interesting UI designs I have seen in quite a bit of time, in that there is no UI design. See, McNamara and crew, they had a vision with this game. They wanted it to play out completely like a Hollywood film. And having those weird health bars and strange ammo counters would have just interfered with that vision, so they cut that shit out entirely. So you can't really tell if you run out of ammo until you've run out of ammo, and you can't tell if you're low on health until your guy just starts limping in place. I mean, I guess that's a better indicator, if anything, but let me tell you about the way that you regain health, because they didn't want it to be totally barren of good design. No, they were considerate enough to allow you to just kind of lean on a wall and take some deep breaths until all your health comes back. If you know anything about this game, it's probably that. And, look, as a game, it's boring, clunky, and very anemic. As a movie, it's boring, clunky, and very anemic. Oh my god, am I talking about Killzone again? And also, like with Killzone, the game runs like shit! But Killzone, at the very least, did not have any game-breaking glitches that I was unable to get past. The Getaway, on the other hand, during the very last section in the ship where you get your boy back, I got through a very belabored sequence of shooting, leaning on a wall, shooting, leaning on a wall, and just barely made it to the final boss and defeated them. And then the game loaded up the next sequence. Or at the very least tried to. Because it kept on loading for the next 3 fucking minutes. And I had already spent the past 2 hours trying to get to the end of this goddamn thing. Because, I forgot to mention, you die really fast. I was this goddamn close to shelving it forever and never having to deal with it again. But I calmed down, I did it once more, and then managed to get it, and it loaded without an issue. It was not a satisfying conclusion in any way, but I beat it. I beat it. That half. Because you actually have more levels in the game with a completely different character, a cop who kind of shows up a couple times during the main dude's journey to get his boy back. And even though it's the same driving about and shooting up the Popo affair, it's a lot shorter and somehow a lot more interesting of a story than the first half ever could be. I'm not entirely sure how that happened because it ends as anticlimactically as the first half did too, but well, you take what you can get. So we have a GTA knockoff, more or less, and an attempt to capitalize on the whole Halo craze, and both of them are complete and utter failures. I need to play more of their exclusives during this time, but I have a horrible feeling that they were just completely hit and miss during this era. Because all of the successful ones I can think of are their mascot platformers, like Ratchet & Clank, Sly Cooper, Jak and Daxter, although that one kind of depends on who you ask. This is more or less pertaining to chasing trends rather than just the original titles. Because there's still a lot to go through that I have not quite gotten to yet, but I will. I just got another one, this fucking thing called the Mark of Cree, I think it's called. I have no idea what that thing is, but it's a Sony published game, so this has got to be good. Or bad. I don't know, at this point it's a crapshoot, and I can't wait to find out what. So that is going to do it for this episode of Crazy Thoughts. I'm not sure if you can tell, but most of this is just kind of off the dome, so to speak. I usually script this shit out and then try to blurt out whatever I've memorized as much as I can, as quickly as I can, so that these aren't like 5 hours long like this session was, because I'm in a bit of a rush before the year ends, and this is likely going to be the case for the next episode as well, which is going to have a completely different topic from video games altogether, but I'm sure you will enjoy. So, as always, thank you for watching. Hope you all had a happy holidays. And until next time, I'll see you later.